So this is a Polio the Basics seminar, and it really is at the request of a number of people to just give an overview of what is the polio program, what is polio, why are we doing it, how are we doing it, where are we at, where are we going. It's not in detail technical, but we have got 5 members of the polio team for Great Britain and Ireland, and we are all available to answer your questions offline, to do talks for you in any more detail, and I'll give you that information later on. What I want to do now is to share my screen with you, and the contact details, email details for Keith, Derek and myself are on the screen. Before I hand over to Keith, who's going to start the presentations, I did actually reach out to Mike McGovern, who's the lead Rotarian. He's the chair of the International Polio Plus Committee. So he is Mr. Rotary Polio, as far as we're concerned. And I just want to read out a couple of things that he said to me in an email. A year ago, to many in this world, Rotary working on polio eradication seemed a bit irrelevant. We were working to provide vaccines to families who didn't necessarily see their importance. We developed and maintained cold chains to deliver vaccines in over 100 countries. We sought national leaders to provide internal funding and external resources to countries unable to garner resources for public health. Fast forward to the end of 2020. Our Polio Plus network has been fully engaged in providing surveillance to keep the coronavirus pandemic in check. Our laboratories are providing testing capabilities that would otherwise have been missing. Polio-funded personnel have provided education on safe distancing, masking, and hand hygiene. The importance of having a cold chain and personnel to maintain it wasn't something new that had to be learned, because we were already doing it. I won't read the rest of it because of time, but it really is incredible what the polio program has done and is doing right now with the current situation. And I will mention that in a little bit more detail later on. But for the moment, what I would like to do is to hand over to Keith Paver, who's the End Polio Now coordinator in Region 20.
This really is a polio basics. It's a quick trawl through what polio virus is and the vaccines and eradication campaign in 12 minutes. So it's a whistle-stop tour. But I begin with talking about endemic polio. Viruses are obligate parasites. They need cells to replicate in, and that can be a plant, a vertebrate, or an invertebrate. And their fundamental structure is determined by the blueprint carried in their genes, which in the case of poliovirus is only 5 genes. And that includes the kind of host species that they will grow in, what cells they'll grow in, and therefore what kind of disease they can cause. That blueprint can change, exactly as the blueprint in our cells can change through what we call random mutation. And that will alter host specificity. It will mean sometimes that viruses will grow in different kinds of cells, and it also will influence their virulence and transmissibility. Polioviruses will grow in the throat, but like other enteroviruses, a family they belong to, they can pass through the acid of the stomach and grow in the gut as well, and therefore be excreted in the feces. There are 3 serological types of polio, types 1, 2, and 3. Types 2 and 3 have been eradicated. So we're left with only type 1, which, although not causing any different kind of disease, was capable of replicating more vigorously than the other 2 types. But the other thing you should need to learn is from the story of endemic polio, is that viruses are opportunistic pathogens. They exploit human host behavior in the case of polio. So when we started to live in big towns and cities, polio became possible to become an endemic disease being transmitted from person to person, generally before their first birthday, so that although it didn't cause disease, it was still being transmitted through the population. The first systematic collection of infectious disease data in the world started probably in this country at the end of the 19th century, something we've been doing ever since. But there are some clues as to what was happening in society communities, particularly in developed countries in the past. London published bills of mortality weekly from about the middle of the 17th century, which is how we know all about plague. But infantile paralysis does not appear on any of those bills of mortality as a cause of death. In fact, it doesn't appear at all, which suggests that most cases were sporadic and there were no epidemics of polio, as we started to see later. You did see 3 other virus diseases, by the way. One of them was called sweating sickness, which is called influenza. There's also measles, which was identified that far back, and smallpox. But something happened in the developed nations of Western Europe and the United States and some of the British colonies at the end of the 19th century. Because of improvements in sanitation, we put in sewers, safe water supplies, and improvements in housing and household hygiene, the age at which children became infected with polio moved upwards to a point at which they were no longer protected by maternal antibody. So now not only was the virus circulating, it was causing disease. I'm pretty sure that if we were to go back in time with a time machine, we would have seen a similar sort of picture in the great cities of Rome and in Egypt, because for the same reasons of improvements in hygiene and sanitation, particularly in Rome. Right, this is my we're into a bit of myth busting. If you Google polio, and you will see that it says it's transmitted by the fecal oral route. Well, that's undoubtedly true. It's excreted in feces, and you can get polio by ingesting anything contaminated with feces. And that is probably how the virus was and is transmitted, mainly in endemic countries. But in the epidemics that occurred in the 20th century, and most significantly after the Second World War in America and Britain and Scandinavia and so on, this was not the mechanism of transmission. Water was clean, there was no sewage contamination of water. And because the disease was mainly seen in middle-class people, it's the main means of transmission was actually from nasopharyngeal secretions. In other words, from virus growing in the throat. That was the main mission. So most poliovirus infection is asymptomatic. It doesn't cause any symptoms at all, or a mild flu-like illness. But the incidence and severity of neurological disease, it increases with age of infection, which is why you were seeing children in the 1950s in the lungs, the artificial lung, because they were getting problems with their breathing muscles, whereas children under 5 normally, if they have any muscle weakness, it's in a lower limb. The mortality from polio is very low. That is, in cases of children under 5 with paralysis, it's about 2 to 5%. But in adults with paralysis, it was up to 30%. I was also going to say that many cases of poliomyelitis where there was muscle weakness, as long as not all the neurons supplying those muscles died, many people recovered slightly. Over a period of 6 to 8 months, they might even regain full strength. And that there are theories about the mechanisms behind that. But if paralysis lasted more than 18 months, it was going to be permanent. Right, the disease of polio is biphasic. The incubation period is about 7 days. So you're in contact with somebody with polio, and about 7 days later, virus can start to be detected in samples taken from you. In the meantime, nothing at all. The first illness, if there is any illness, lasts a couple of days. It's a pretty typical headache, anorexia, sore throat and vomiting. You must get fed up when you go to a doctor and says you've got a flu-like illness. But that is basically true of many viruses. Maximum infectivity, the point at which you're shedding most virus, begins with onset of symptoms and lasts for about a week. Although fecal shedding can last up to 7 weeks. So a child with polio, who is infected with polio, is most infectious starting about 7 days after they contacted another child for about 7 days. Then children would often get better, those with symptoms, and would feel better for a few days before their symptoms would return. That is the flu-like illness and other symptoms, if they were going to occur, of involvement of the central nervous system, mainly neck pain, stiffness and drowsiness, which is typical of aseptic meningitis, from which all children recovered. But those who were going to become paralyzed, this is when the paralytic phase would happen. So we're talking over 2 weeks, well over 2 weeks after they were infected. The man who started the progress towards polio vaccines was Theodore Roosevelt, because in 1938 he created the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which is what the letter that you can see there on the left is all about. And it was an alliance between scientists and volunteers and many people in the entertainment industry. And it raised huge amounts of money, which funded the research to produce the vaccines. And you see the two great vaccine pioneers there, Jonas Salk, who produced the inactivated vaccine, and Albert Sabin, who produced the oral polio vaccine, which you have used so much over recent years. I'm told they couldn't stand each other, but that's another story. The name of this was March of Dimes, and it's still working today, but it's moved on. So on the April the 12th, 1955, which was the 10th anniversary of Roosevelt's death, it was announced that Salk's inactivated vaccine was effective and potent. Within 2 hours, the US Public Health Service had produced a production license and prepared for a national immunization campaign. And that conference was broadcast, live broadcast, to physicians all over the country and to millions of people who'd gathered in movie theaters to watch the announcement. This was real news that people were spontaneously wanting to learn about. And you can find photographs from America of the 1955 onwards of huge queues of all age groups out in the streets queuing to have their vaccine. And after 2 doses of that inactivated, killed vaccine, 90% or more of individuals developed protective immunity. But it didn't mean that they could not transmit the virus. In other words, it protected against disease, but not against infection. Sabin's virus came a bit later. It was produced by repeatedly passaging, that is, the virus, you isolate, put it into cells and then infect more cells and so on at sub-physiological temperatures. In other words, you grew it at temperatures lower than in the body, and it caused mutation, which meant loss of pathogenicity, loss of the ability to cause disease, and also some loss of transmissibility. A single dose produces immunity to all 3 polio virus types in 50% of recipients, 3 doses in 95% of recipients, similar to what we're hearing about COVID vaccines today. And the human trials of this vaccine began in 1957 in the Soviet Union, and there were 100 million volunteers. It was licensed in 1962. Inactivated vaccine did not do much to reduce the amount of virus circulating. It did a bit. It presented disease. It was only with the oral vaccine and its rollout that we actually controlled the epidemics. I just thought I'd put this up. This is what happened in Great Britain. In 1955, 1956, the UK government decided not to use the American vaccine, but to develop our own, to fund development of our own, for reasons for which were as much economic as scientific. And these are queues. The queue on the picture on the left are people queuing in Dundee to receive the vaccine, and on the right are children waiting with their parents at the polio vaccination clinics. But because we were short of vaccine, it had inadequate supplies, although the government wanted to vaccinate everybody under the age of 25, it was rationed. Parents had to register their children, and then they would be called by, I suppose, the normal buff letter in a buff envelope when they were told when they could go to take their child for vaccination. Unfortunately, by 1960, that is 4 years after the campaign began, only 70% of children under 10 had been vaccinated. But in 1962, after a trial that controlled an outbreak in Hull in 1961, the oral polio vaccine replaced inactivated vaccine in the United Kingdom. The little yellow IPV, you can see there was a reduction in the number of cases, that's the bars per year, which was dropping. But it was only once we started using the oral polio vaccine that the number of cases grew to single figures per year. And the last case was 22 years later in 1984, last indigenous case. It took that long to actually eradicate the virus in the UK. Well, basically, we want to talk about the eradication campaign. And the Global Eradication Campaign was inaugurated with a vote in the World Health Assembly in 1988, although Rotary had been involved since 1978-79, first of all in the Philippines, and also by its advocacy and it persuading WHO and UNICEF and CDC Atlanta that eradication was a possible thing. On the left, we always talk about in 1988, there were around 1/3 cases of paralysis across the world per year. The left is a map that shows you the rate per million. So the dark red and orange areas of the map are where the most cases were being seen. And we're in the dark blue area where we'd virtually got rid of polio altogether. And the map on the right shows the success of a campaign over the next 40 years. And what I have to say is that, and I pass on to Derek in a minute to talk about cost. I think the thing we should feel most proud about is the fact that we have together as a large community of 1.2 million people basically almost eradicated, because of the work we've done and the money we've raised and our advocacy, basically almost eradicated the second human virus after smallpox, something that would seemed impossible back in 1980 when that left-hand map was produced. The map on the right shows that now Nigeria was declared polio free last year, and so you've only got Afghanistan and Pakistan where the virus is endemic. The dots, each dot on these maps are single cases of acute flaccid paralysis caused by polio virus. There's a lot more cases of acute flaccid paralysis, and every one has to be tested. A polio virus is responsible for a very, very small percentage. And as you can see, that the number of cases in total in Afghanistan and Pakistan this last year was 140. There was a case reported last week, but its concept date was back in November. And that's fewer than the year before. And you can see that the three problem areas that are yellow, pink and blue on the map are the border areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And this is where basically tribes and groups, nomadic groups, move across those borders, because the border itself is, in terms of their culture, a meaningless imposition, I'm afraid, by a British civil servant. So Afghanistan and Pakistan tried to control those border crossings by vaccinating everybody, irrespective of their immunization history, who passes through them. The Friendship Gate alone, which I think is in the border in the pink area and the road that goes from Peshawar to Kabul, that has a daily foot traffic of 30,000 travelers. That's 30,000 people who need to be vaccinated crossing that border. It is an enormous effort to do so. As I said, I'd hoped to be able to say there have been no cases of acute flaccid paralysis by polio, wild polio, in 6 weeks. Well, that last case was, its onset date was 23rd of November, but it takes that long sometimes for these to be reported. This is the bar chart, and this shows you when the cases peaked. So it was in Pakistan, they peaked at around Christmas last year, and they've been very low numbers after March, April this year. In Afghanistan, they peaked in May and June, but again, they've been falling off, so that there is a very marked decline, an important decline in the number of cases of acute flaccid paralysis. But one of the things that is done is not only national immunization campaigns, they had to stop between March and July because of the COVID-19. The surveillance didn't, but the vaccination did. But where they see hotspots, the governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan carry out special immunization activities to deal with those hotspots. But I'm going to conclude, apart from saying we should be very proud, by saying that the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, of which we are in Rotary are a founding partner and a very, very important partner, and we're not neglected by the press. There is an article authored by Mike McGovern in 2017 in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, I think, which is about the Rotary polio campaign. The initiative estimates we've averted 16 million cases of paralytic polio since 1988, that we have improved healthcare in those areas and delivery of other things, which is what something Janine might say about the way forward. So what we have done is has transformed healthcare in the parts of the world where we're active. And I'm going to close there. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. So now if I'd like to hand over to Derek, who's the End Polio Now coordinator for Region 21. Derek.
Thank you very much, Janine, and thank you to Keith as well for that very detailed and complete description of what polio is all about. I was going to start off my talk here saying that Polio Eradication Initiative is the largest ever internationally coordinated public health effort in history. It rather gives the game away when it comes to the cost of the programme. It is huge. I did reflect on that statement, which was on the GB&I website, thinking about COVID and what we're going to be doing with that particular effort, because that is a huge initiative across the world as well. In the case of polio, without funding from national governments and the 6 partners of the GB&I, GB&I being the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, as you will see on the slide, we wouldn't have a chance of succeeding. Fortunately, there are enough philanthropic organisations and people to guarantee success, providing we keep our foot on the gas and don't let off our fundraising efforts for 1 second. The slide shows a list of the partners who support the Eradication Initiative. The partners, governance bodies and technical advisory groups all work to generate technical guidance for countries working to eradicate polio, policy on vaccination programmes and health advocacy commitments and actions. The list of partners, that list there, is, as the BBC would say, in no particular order. This slide, if you look at the very top line, the contributions to GB&I total 17 billion. It took me a bit to work that one out, but it is 17 billion, 17,409 million. That is a huge amount of money. The boxes attempts to show the contribution from the different people. It's rather small, so I'll just read some of them out to you. The USA has contributed over 3.5 billion. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, just slightly less than 3.5 billion. Rotary has contributed just over 2 billion, and that is something we should be really proud of. The UK has given 1.6 billion, the World Bank 1.2 billion, and the next lowest one below there is Germany at 686 million. So the numbers are seriously large, and we have to realise what has been achieved in raising that money, getting commitments to that money, and delivering the vaccines and the infrastructure which allows us to stop this the spread of this terrible disease. The slide is a statement of what is needed. On the left-hand side, you see the budget for last year, 2020, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and this is an extraction from the GB&I website. It's one of those websites where you can get most of the information, but it's getting it to relate one page with another page is not entirely difficult. So although the numbers will be roughly right, I can't guarantee they're exactly right. There's around about $180 million in Afghanistan and Pakistan budgeted for this year, but all countries are 961 million. And this is because the vaccinations need to continue. We need to keep a handle on the circulating polio virus. I don't know whether Keith has said anything about that. On the right-hand side of that, you will see a slide which shows the conversion of pledges for the 4-year programme which is the GB&I strategy. And you'll see that there is a gap, and the gap is 15% of the budget, which is around about £500 million. So to continue this, according to our plans, we need to raise the whole mix of contributors to the polio program needs to fund another 500 million. And so there's, in every time we're speaking about this money, it's always serious money. My final slide shows where the money is being sent. Unfortunately, it's rather small, but I hope I can explain a little bit about it. On the right-hand column graph, it's a breakdown of the yellow area on the left-hand graph. So if you look at the left-hand graph and the orange bit there, which is the majority of that, that is basically the immunisation programme. And on the right-hand side, that breaks down that section into three different parts. There is the procurement, that is buying the vaccine. There is the publicity, and publicity is important because it tells people that, one, taking the vaccine is a good thing, and two, that the vaccine is available. And then finally, there is the surveillance, that is monitoring what is happening, whether the virus is diminishing or increasing or whatever. It results in some of the slides which Keith has shown, which are the hotspots. Rotary has the opportunity to make a significant impact on the programme. Last year, we achieved the $50 million target, which meant that Rotary contributions were fully matched by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We really want to try and do this again, and we rely on the donations from everybody to achieve that. This is obviously a worldwide target, it's not a UK target, but we need to think about how we in the UK can play our part. So that concludes what I'd like to say about the costs. To emphasise, there's lots of money involved. We need to raise money as well. And I'd like to hand over now to Janine and enjoy Janine's message.
Thanks very much, Derek. And as Derek has said, this does all cost a lot of money. And Rotary is a very important player, not just about the money that we raised ourselves, either by putting our own hands in our pockets or with fundraising initiatives with our community, but also in the advocacy work that we do. Because we do have a major impact on governments of the world and their politicians knowing that their constituents, us Rotarians, actually care about the polio programme. But that's another subject, and I'll mention later that Judith Diamond is the Rotarian to give you a bigger talk about that area. So every pound we raise, remember, is worth two. But we have not just got the wild polio that we have to deal with. And as Derek just very briefly mentioned, there is also the vaccine-derived polio. And if you remember, you've got those two vaccines, the oral vaccine and the injectable vaccine. Well, that oral vaccine can be a little unstable. And there is, in rare instances, the danger of it reverting to wild type polio. And that would generally only happen if it's been circulating in the environment in areas where there is poor immunization coverage, poor vaccination levels for more than 12 months. In those areas, there is the danger that it can revert and become circulating vaccine-derived polio. The really good news is that there have actually now been two vaccines developed by genetically modifying that oral vaccine that it is believed are going to be safe and effective and will not cause vaccine-derived cases. But please remember, over 10 billion, that's an awful lot of noughts and an awful lot of children, over 10 billion doses of polio vaccine have been administered over the years, and around 2,000 cases of vaccine-derived polio have occurred. So it isn't a huge problem, but when we say that we are going to eradicate polio, we are going to eradicate, and we have to eradicate polio in every form off the face of the earth. after over 10 years of development, it's fantastic news that the WHO have agreed an emergency use listing procedure for the new oral polio vaccine type 2. So there's 3 types of polio: type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 2 is the one that is most likely to cause circulating vaccine-derived polio. And starting this year, in very limited use at the moment, that new oral vaccine, novel OPV2, will be deployed in a measured way, initially for 3 months, and the safe controls are in place to monitor the effects of it and to make sure that they're clear on what the implications are or aren't of actually using it in the field. And there's also controls to make sure it's not used sooner than after 6 weeks after the normal OPV has been given. So there can be no confusion over what has or hasn't caused the vaccine-derived polio. So that's a really important thing. And if we actually look here on this map, this shows Afghanistan and Pakistan. All of these dots, and also in other parts of the world, are instances in 2020 where there has been vaccine-derived polio. So it's really important that we're not just dealing with the wild polio, but that we do deal with any outbreaks. And an outbreak is classed as one single case in a country. It's already classed as an emergency outbreak. So we are having to deal with these cases, as well as making sure that we knock wild polio on the head. And do remember that it's not just Afghanistan and Pakistan that we are dealing with. We are dealing with eradicating polio. To do that, we have to keep countries and regions that are declared wild polio free. We have to keep them like that. You know, it's 10 years this year since the last case of wild polio in India. That is absolutely tremendous, a great reason to celebrate. But we have to work hard in India, in Africa, and in fact, all over the world where the Global Polio Eradication Initiative is working to make sure that we are keeping it, the whole world, we have to make it entirely polio free. Just so that you're aware, the red here on these bar graphs, so you've got 2018, 19 and 20. The red is the wild polio virus and the green is the vaccine-derived polio. So you can see in Afghanistan and Pakistan, there are indeed some cases of vaccine-derived polio, and that's just examples. So we really do have to knock that on the head. But let's just take a step back and look at what the 4 objectives are of the polio eradication plan. We have to detect and interrupt all polio virus transmission. That's all of it, wild, vaccine, whatever. We are interrupting polio. We are and have been and have, it's been so clearly demonstrated with the COVID response, strengthening immunization systems. And that's making sure that we are introducing the injectable vaccine alongside routine immunizations, and that over time we can be withdrawing more and more the oral polio vaccine. Once we have got the world free of polio and the world is certified free of polio, we must also contain those viruses that may be maintained in laboratories for very limited purposes. And we also have to plan the polio legacy. And all of this is all happening at the same time. It's all part of the work that we are funding through the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. And Rotary is such a key player in raising those funds and advocating for raising those funds. So thank you to everybody that's on this call for everything that you have done and that you are going to be doing in the near future and longer term future, till we can actually have that amazing party when we celebrate the world being polio free. Let's just remember, it is an entirely preventable disease. We do have safe and effective vaccines. There is absolutely no cure for polio. And people are today living with polio. They are the polio survivors, and it's absolutely vital that we remember them. Polio is just a word to many of us, Polio, 5 letters. But actually, to those polio survivors, to their families, to their communities, it is so much more. And one of our previous talks was actually with some polio survivors. All of those talks from previous seminars are available on the Rotary Great Britain and Ireland YouTube channel. And I highly recommend that you listen to the one from November, Polio is More Than a Word, because it really does take it back to that real human level, because this is about people. This is about saving children's lives and giving them a future where they do not have to worry about polio, and they also do not have to worry about post-polio syndrome. Too short of time to talk to you about that, but do remember looking about polio survivors in your community. If you don't know if you've got any, do reach out to Rotarian Colin Powell, who is a polio survivor and a member of the British Polio Fellowship, as well as an amazing Rotarian. Colin will be very pleased to hear from you on rotaryhelps@powellnet.co.uk to find out if there are people in your area, polio survivors, who could do with some help through these very difficult times, even if it's just a phone call, or if it's perhaps reaching out to any people in the British Polio Fellowship in your community who can help you with spreading the message to raise money and to raise awareness. Don't forget, Polio Plus is what this campaign has always been known from the very outset. And Keith alluded to it in a few times. You know, we have done so much more than just eradicating polio. For instance, there are drops of vitamin A in the polio drops. That alone has saved over 1.8 million children's lives. The polio infrastructure was fundamental in stopping an outbreak of Ebola in Nigeria a few years ago. We've been doing malaria nets. We provide basic water, for instance, in Pakistan, working with Coca-Cola and Rotary together, have actually provided clean water to hundreds and thousands of people. We've provided vitamin D. We've offered malaria tablets. We organise health camps, all part of the polio programme, helping to ensure that people are healthier before they receive their drops, that their immune systems are more capable of building their own immunity through the polio drops to the polio vaccine. And of course, with the COVID response, not just in the response when the COVID situation first arose, but that response has been ongoing in many parts of the world, both through Rotary and through the polio programme, the polio infrastructure and workers. And in fact, many people, many Rotarians are now helping with the COVID vaccine rollout. Please make sure you use that as an opportunity to raise awareness of Rotary's work for polio. Fundraising and awareness ideas, I'd love to come and give your club a talk about it, your group about it, your district about it. There are lots of opportunities. I'm not going to go through all this plethora of images here, but they are just examples. Please, please, please tell us whatever you are doing to raise awareness or money for polio, so that we can put you a blob on the map of activities across Great Britain and Ireland. We have got lots of things for sale through the End Polio Now shop that my own club and through my husband and I that we run. There's the purple gin, the buttonholes, we've got wristbands, don't forget Rotary Polio Bear, all sorts of things. Read your polio service news, which will be coming out to Rotarians in Great Britain and Ireland in a couple of weeks' time. There are some ideas in there, there's some fundraising success stories. Please tell us what you're doing and how successful you are. Share your photos, use hashtag End Polio, use hashtag Purple for Polio. Please keep those offers going. Please keep that activity going. We've got another opportunity. World Polio Day was a great success in Great Britain and Ireland. Rotary Day, Rotary's own birthday, Tuesday the 23rd of February. What could you be doing in your club on or around that day? Could you hold a Fill Your Plate for Polio activity? It's an activity supported by the world's greatest meal team. It's about doing anything to do with raising that money and awareness about the polio program. And even in lockdown, have a meeting where you all hold up an empty plate and you pass, whether you can donate 20 pence or a £5 note or a £1 note, whatever you can donate, or just paint your plate purple. Just do something for a fill your plate for polio activity. But at 4 o'clock till 5 o'clock on the 23rd of February, Great Britain and Ireland, we're going to have a birthday party. We're going to have a Purple for Polio tea party, a bit of light entertainment for everybody to join in, Rotarians or not. We're hoping that the British Polio Fellowship members will join us as well. Anyone, anywhere in the world, welcome to join us at 4 till 5 then. I said about the team, Keith, Derek and myself, those are our email addresses. Don't forget, we've got Eve Conway, who's on the Countdown Campaign Committee, fantastic speaker, and also Judith Diamond, who's the specialist on national advocacy. She's our National Polio Plus advocacy advisor and does so much globally for the advocacy elements. Keith, as you know, is a doctor, he's a virologist, and he's the expert to talk to about the more intricate details. Derek is very much about the money, about how to get that money in, and I'm very much there for helping you with fundraising ideas and to give you all a bit of a boost. So it's a whistle-stop tour. We've taken longer than we anticipated. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to ask you all to carry on with what you are doing and to please keep the efforts that you are doing and spread the word. I'd like to open it up to Keith in a moment to field any of the questions which are coming through to him. I have had a question in advance from Bill Peacock from Australia, who unfortunately was planning to be with us, although it was 5 o'clock in the morning his side, but unfortunately hasn't been able to, but he's asked if we could still ask the question. And Keith, I think I'd like to put this one to you. What strategic plan do we need to put in place to continue the efforts to end polio, and how can we all help?
I don't know. I mean, in talking about the strategic approach, I mean, I think that Rotary International has a very good strategic approach. The team that we have, not just those of us who are End Polio Now coordinators, but the full support of the board of Rotary International and the trustees, and with the incoming chairman of the trustees will be John Jerm, past president, who has been involved in the polio campaign for a long time, and under the leadership of Mike McGovern, who is basically fronts it all. I think we have a very good strategic campaign. We talk about how we can do it. The main problem is that we need to persuade Rotarians in this country, in our case, but across the world, of course, as End Polio Now coordinators, that to not finish the job would be, what can we say? It would be turning our backs on the efforts of Rotarians since 1978-79, which has been so, not just the money raised, but the tremendous number of hours of volunteer time that people have put in. I don't know if any of you have been on a National Immunisation Day. I'm sure some of you have been to India on the National Immunisation Day. I learned very soon when I was there that actually me putting drops into the children's mouths was not the most important thing. It was the fact that the Rotarians in India felt that because we were there, we took very seriously the work they had been doing, which was an immunisation day every 6 weeks. And to do it, they had to put out information, they had to put out or put up posters and so on. Their enthusiasm was what eventually led to the eradication of polio in India. Similarly, in Pakistan today, Rotarians are deeply involved, and Judith can talk about that because she knows Azim Memnon personally, that we are putting into practice the plan agreed by the WHO epidemiology.
Keith, I've just muted you. I'm sorry, we do need to give time to other people to for the other questions that you've got. I'm going to unmute you again, but we do need to keep our answers succinct, please, so that we've got time for some more questions. So would you like to give us one of the questions you've received?
Right. One of the questions I've received is actually from Nick Gidney, was what are we going to talk about circulating vaccine-derived virus? I think we've done that sufficiently tonight, but I would say to Nick, I'm quite happy to come and talk to your club or any other club about it. What else we got? There aren't very many. I mean, it basically, this is from Urs, who is my equivalent in zones 15 and 16. And he says, what will you do to get this money out of the pockets of our Rotarians? Well, I think everybody here today who's joined this, you are the advocates we need to get the money out of all the Rotarians you know. Use your advocacy to talk to other people, to share your interest, and to tell them that this is something, it's still Rotary's #1 humanitarian project, and it has changed lives and will continue to change lives. I think that that's what we can say.
I've actually got another one then. And this is from Linda Gebser, and I apologise for the pronunciation if I've got that wrong, Linda. How are Rotaractors involved in the polio campaign or activities in England, well, Great Britain and Ireland? And do they also participate in polio funding? Yeah, I mean, I'd like to actually answer that question, because absolutely, Rotaractors are very much involved. I mean, it's up to each Rotaract club, just like it's up to every Rotary club, what they do or don't do in relation to polio or anything else. But we are very, very keen, and some of them do some incredible things. I mean, the new Rotaract club in London, when it was formed last year, they did a fantastic Purple for Polio online Prosecco party. With some great entertainment, and in fact one or two of the entertainers from there will be joining us on Rotary Day on the 23rd of February, and that's just one example of many examples. And you know, the polio campaign is actually something, it's not just for your foundation chair or your polio champion or your international. It is something for every Rotarian. We are all responsible as Rotarians for making good on that promise. And it's not just about supporting our colleagues in areas where they're out, not just raising money, but actually rolling up their sleeves and working on this regularly, day in, day out, in one form or another. But it's also honouring those that have lost their lives, and the families of those that have lost their lives or have suffered severely, because they are polio warriors. They are out there, and we mustn't forget them either. And use the opportunity for the raised awareness in the public that a polio virus, just like a COVID virus, could literally be a plane ride away. The whole world now understands a virus being a plane ride away. The whole world now understands the importance of vaccination. Use the Rotary polio story and the COVID work that your club has been doing or is doing and going to be doing. Use the two to spread the word, and please stay involved. Derek, is there anything else that you want to say?
I think that you've covered most of the things, actually. You nicely covered the circulating polio vaccine. There is a need to increase our giving. I think I saw one of the questions go past, which was, has the donations gone up or down? It was in the context of COVID, but we've noticed that over the past, this past 6 months, that our donations have gone down. It's been a bit of an up and down story. It was a very slow start. And in November, we got quite a substantial amount of money, which was very good. I think that if we continue on this trajectory, we will see that by the end of the year, we will still be down. So it's going to be down to us to encourage Rotarians to raise the money to give to the polio program.
Thanks, Derek. I've got somebody who's raised their hand, but unfortunately we're not opening up the mic to people. So I think, I can't get into it now, but I think it was somebody, Jake Way. If you are, could you type the question in the chat box, please?
What David has said is, and he asked for an observation, that he had a talk from a polio survivor last week. Well, my best man was a polio survivor. So I've known him for 52 years. And he said not only was the issue of post-polio syndrome discussed. Now I could talk about what the causes of that. I cut that out, but also discrimination in later life. And this, I think, is a problem. It's not just polio survivors. It's partly something to do with our attitudes to people who are disabled, which, I mean, having my wife was a musculoskeletal physio, so both of us have been involved with physically disabled people for most of our working lives. And it seems to me very sad. And it's part of our education brief as Rotarians to say that all people are of equal value and that all have something to contribute. And I think that, and also recognizing the psychological difficulties that many of these people have. And I do understand that people with post-polio syndrome, when they get a return of the symptoms, are undergoing psychological problems. And again, support for those we know is very important.
Indeed, Keith. And in fact, I commend you all again to watch the YouTube recording from the November seminar, which is Polio is More Than a Word, because David, many of the points you've mentioned and what Keith has said are covered very clearly by polio survivors, because this is about people getting an entirely preventable disease and the impact it has on their life. And different people have different impacts. You know, for some people, they use it to galvanize their strength and do incredible things. For others, it's really, they really do struggle with life is a burden for them because of polio. But it's the complete spectrum, the continuum of the results of the polio infection throughout their life, and that does change over time. You know, there's over 120,000 polio survivors, it's estimated, in the UK. And, you know, what are they going through right now with lockdown? Get involved, get them talking to you, see what you can do to help them. I'm really concerned that we are now at just 2 minutes to go. I would like to thank Keith and Derek very much for joining us this evening. Please remember that Eve, Judith, Keith, Derek and myself are all available at any time to answer your questions, to speak to your club. And don't forget also, think about connecting with clubs outside of Rotary. You know, the Women's Institute, Sir Optimus, whatever. We're not the only ones in lockdown having online meetings. Let's use that as an opportunity to spread the word. Please spread the word. Once you get the registration information for our birthday party on Rotary Day, 4 till 5, please get involved with that. If any of you, I mean, we've got the program pretty much filled, but we might have a couple of slots. If any of you want to entertain us for a few minutes, or have got some ideas of what we might include in that, then we'd be very pleased to hear from you. So I really would like to just say a big thank you to everyone. When the recording does come out, please do share it with people. We are here to help you at any time. We're here to receive your constructive feedback, and we'd love to hear your ideas and what you are doing to raise money for and raise awareness of Rotary's End Polio Now programme and the work of our partners. So thank you, and over to you all to have a good evening.